Okay, everybody, we're right just after 1 o'clock, so we're going to get started. My name is Adrienne Burney. I'm the outreach coordinator for the State Archives, and we're very excited today to have an illustrious panel of Lafayette experts with us to share some highlights from our collection, as well as just learn about Lafayette, why he was important, and what different communities in North Carolina are preparing to do in the near future to commemorate his historic farewell tour 200 years ago. So we want to be able to share some of these highlights in regular programs. We're so happy you all are joining us. And we also share highlights from our collection in many other ways, including social media and our digital collection and on Flickr. So we hope you will be able to participate with us in those number of ways, as well as coming into our search room here in Raleigh or our branches in Manio and Asheville. I'm going to start out by introducing our first speaker, Frank Womble. And he's going to gear up his presentation. Let me stop my share so that he can start. We'll be talking about a whole variety of events today, and I know it's a lot for everyone to keep up with and make notes, but right after this, I will be sending all our registrants a list of all the different events we're talking about today and more. So with that, Frank Womble is a native of Northampton County, North Carolina. He's a graduate of NC State University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in sociology in 1977 and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in field artillery. He served on active duty in the Army for 25 years, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. Frank is on the board of governors of the American Friends of Lafayette and has edited and self-published several books about Lafayette. So we're going to gain some of his insights right now. Thank you, Frank. And Frank, you're muted. Okay, Frank, you're still muted.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, now
okay. Yeah, you got to be smarter than the machine. But anyway, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm happy to talk to you today about Lafayette's actually two visits to North Carolina. He was here first in 1777 after arriving in South Carolina to fight in the Revolution. He did not go to Boston or New York because those ports were blockaded by the British fleet. He did pass through North Carolina on his way to Philadelphia, but we have very little information about that trip, except that we are, due to a letter not written by Lafayette, we know that on or about the 15th of July, he passed through Halifax, and that's everything we know. So in 1824, President James Monroe invited Lafayette to visit the United States as the guest of the nation. Congress passed a resolution to that same effect. Monroe felt that Lafayette's presence would help revive American patriotism, since the spirit of '76 had faded as America expanded westward after the Revolution. The Panic of 1819 lasted for 3 years, slowed national growth. The Missouri Compromise was just a temporary solution to the festering problem of expansion of slavery. And we were in the midst of an extremely divisive presidential election. America badly needed a hero figure, and Lafayette needed something too. He had failed in a decades-long quest to bring constitutional monarchy to France. When Lafayette arrived in the United States in August of 1824, there was no intent for him to visit the southern and western states at all. But the demands for his presence simply couldn't be ignored, so the planning for a dramatically expanded trip got underway while he was in Washington during the winter of 1824-25. The problems here are quite obvious. This will be a long trip, bad roads, and the added pressure of a deadline. Lafayette must be back in Boston by June 17th to lay the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument in his role as a Mason. If you were leaving Washington today and going to Raleigh, the first major destination, you would travel due south through Richmond, but roads south of Richmond were badly broken, and so Lafayette took an alternate route. He took a 2-night steamboat trip down the Potomac River in the Chesapeake Bay to Norfolk. This avoided the badly broken road south of Richmond and eliminated about 100 miles of land travel and took advantage of the better conditions on what was called the Lower Sandy Road through my current hometown of Suffolk and northeastern North Carolina. The Lafayette arrived in Norfolk around 1 o'clock in the morning on February the 25th. He rested for a few hours at the city hotel, made a few calls, and then took a coach directly to Suffolk. He attended a banquet at the courthouse that night and stayed overnight nearby at the Castle Inn. The next morning, he began his trip into North Carolina. Lafayette departed Suffolk and met the advance delegation from Murfreesboro, North Carolina, just a few miles outside of Somerton near the current town of Whaleyville. The entire party retired to the Washington Smith Ordinary, where Lafayette was formally introduced to the men from Murfreesboro and enjoyed an excellent midday meal. He continued onward to Murfreesboro later that same afternoon. This is the route that Lafayette took through his 8-day visit to North Carolina. You can see that he did indeed take that Lower Sandy Road westward through Murfreesboro to Halifax before turning southwest and passing through Enfield, Rocky Mount, Raleigh, and his namesake town of Fayetteville, the first town in the country named for him and the only one that he ever actually visited. Lafayette arrived late in the evening in Murfreesboro. He was delayed by bad roads that were quite muddy, and his carriage was stuck up to the mud in the axles just outside of town for over an hour. After a torch-lit greeting in the center of the town, his party dined until midnight at the Indian Queen Inn and stayed overnight there. Lafayette will be formally welcomed back to Murfreesboro, at the town hall, followed by a reception at the nearby Hertford Academy. We don't know if Lafayette visited Hertford Academy, but the building was standing there when he visited. Lafayette left Murfreesboro the next morning around 10 o'clock and made an unplanned stop at a place that was then called Zion Meeting House. It's near present-day Conway, North Carolina. He may have stopped to water his horses. It was a Sunday and the locals were there and they knew he was coming by. And so they had lined the road to see him, but there was some sort of an incident. Either he got stuck in the mud again, or perhaps a carriage wheel fell off, but men of the church came forward, helped him get back on the road. There is not an event currently planned at Zion Meeting House. Lafayette continued to Northampton Courthouse, present-day Jackson, and the county seat of Northampton County, where he was met by the official North Carolina state delegation from Raleigh, which had been delayed by the same bad roads that had delayed Lafayette. He was addressed by the first Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, John Lewis Taylor, and was reunited with Colonel William Polk, who fought alongside him at the Battle of Brandywine, where both men were wounded. He ate an afternoon meal at the Calvert Tavern before continuing on to Halifax that afternoon. Lafayette will return to Jackson. A carriage procession will bring Lafayette into town, and following a welcome ceremony at the old Northampton County Courthouse, there will be a period costume luncheon at the Bayside Restaurant. Lafayette crossed the Roanoke River by ferry just outside of Halifax. His arrival there was announced by cannon fire. His carriage escorted into town, where he was addressed by Major Allen Davie at the Old Constitution House. He attended a ball at the Eagle Tavern and slept overnight there. Lafayette visited his brother Masons at the Royal White Hart Masonic Lodge, one of the oldest Masonic lodges in North Carolina, which still meets in the same building today. And I might note that Halifax is rare because it has not one but two buildings still standing that Lafayette actually visited. Lafayette will arrive in Halifax once again by carriage, where he will be greeted at the Eagle Tavern and addressed by a descendant of Major Allen Davie. A dinner at the Hen and the Hog restaurant will follow immediately thereafter. The next morning, Lafayette left Halifax and stopped briefly at the Grove, the home of Wiley Jones, where he had an emotional reunion with Jones's widow, Mary Montfort Jones. Mrs. Jones's daughter, Mrs. Sarah Burton, was also there. She is the wife of North Carolina Governor Hutchins Burton. The Grove collapsed in the 1960s. There is no event currently planned here. Lafayette continued onwards that same day towards Falls of the Tar. We know it today as Rocky Mount, and stopped briefly in Enfield at the Cellar, the home of Joseph Branich, where he stayed for a short period of time and addressed a group of locals. This building still stands, and Lafayette will be welcomed back at a reception at the Cellar. Lafayette's entourage crossed the Tar River at the Falls, present-day Rocky Mount, and stayed at Henry Donaldson's Tavern. The local DAR chapter will rededicate the 1933 marker that commemorates Donaldson's Tavern and Lafayette's visit there. That evening, there'll be a dinner at the Powerhouse at the Mills and a dance demonstration. When Lafayette visited Falls of the Tar the first time, he witnessed a mazy dance, a form of country line dance that was popular in the early 19th century. In the morning, Lafayette traveled west 50 miles, about the limit of a day's journey by carriage, and spent the night at Colonel Allen Rogers's Tavern at Rogers Crossroads. This is in eastern Wake County. The tavern no longer stands, but the family home pictured here still stands and is one of the oldest homes in Raleigh. Lafayette may have visited here. We know little about Lafayette's stay, however. After such a long day of travel, it seems quite likely that he enjoyed a quiet dinner and then rested. There is no current event planned here at Rogers Crossroads. The following day, on March 2nd, Lafayette arrived at Crabtree Creek Bridge at noon and was met by a band, numerous dignitaries, and an honor guard of cavalry that had traveled from Charlotte, which escorted him into Raleigh. Lafayette viewed Canova's 1820 statue of George Washington at the state capitol, and he said that the likeness was, quote, so much better than he expected to see, unquote. Afterwards, he was escorted to the government house, where there was an elegant 5 o'clock dinner for about 100 people. He also attended a ball for 300 at the governor's palace that evening. A reenactment of Lafayette's visit to the Capitol is planned that will include a tour and refreshments. Canova's original statue was destroyed when the Capitol collapsed in a fire in 1831, but this copy of it, sculpted by Romano Bio in 1970, still stands today. And at this point, I will turn the presentation over to Hank Parfit, who will address plans in Fayetteville.
Okay, I'm going to introduce Hank as he's gearing up with his presentation and his slides. Hank is also a native of North Carolina and a University of Virginia graduate. He received the Longleaf Pine Award from Governor Pat McCrory in 2015, which is the year he retired from a long practice in urology in Fayetteville. He is President Emeritus of the Lafayette Society of Fayetteville and currently serves on the board of the American Friends of Lafayette. He's chairman of the Committee of Arrangements, planning the bicentennial celebration of Lafayette's farewell tour in Fayetteville on March 4th and 5th, and we're going to hear all about that. Slides look good, Hank.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you, Frank. That was a fantastic introduction. I always enjoy hearing your talks. As Frank said, Fayetteville was the first city named for Lafayette in 1783. This well documented. It was signed by the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the House on March 17th of 1783. This image is an image of the State House and the square in the middle center of historic downtown. The State House is the building in the back. It burned in the Great Fire of 1831. And in its place stands the Market House or Town House, which is very similar in appearance. This etching, if you will, was done by Horace Say, whose father was, at the time, France's most well-known economist. Horace Say was traveling in the United States. He happened upon Fayetteville and learned that it had been named after his friend Lafayette. So when he returned to France, he presented Lafayette with this image that he had drawn, and it still hangs in Lafayette Chateau, Lagrange, to this day. We know there's a letter we don't have a copy of it. We've got reprints of the letter from Lafayette to Paris on March the 5th, when he references this town that you will recognize from the painting hanging in my room. When Lafayette arrived on March the 4th, everyone in town came out to see him. Groups of people lined the road from the Cape Fear River all the way to the State House, a distance of 1.5 miles. And artillery units along the way fired their cannon to let the people at the State House know that Lafayette was on his way. The welcoming speech was given by North Carolina Superior Court Judge John Toomer. And while his speech was rather lengthy, the one segment of that speech, the one quote that we have used because it is really beautifully done, was this: "You, sir, have been the steadfast friend of liberty in every period of your life. In youth, you fought the battles of freedom. In age, you advocated the rights of man." This drawing, we don't know the provenance on this. We know it's been in our city museum as far back as anyone can remember. We don't know whether it was done by someone who was there at the time or someone much later, or even if it was done by a school kid in the 1960s as a project. But it's very accurate in terms of these buildings and the State House and the size of the crowd, the stage, which had to be built because there were no balconies on the State House, and these hash marks in the sky. That represents rain because indeed it was raining and the streets were muddy, and it did not dampen anyone's enthusiasm, however. A Colonel Ayres provided Lafayette with the use of his carriage while he was in town. That carriage is here in the Museum of the Fayetteville Independent Light Infantry. You can see the uniform guard here. They were Lafayette's bodyguard when he visited in 1825. The fellow who put all this together, is charged of the planning committee 200 years ago, was Major Robert Strange. He has the title Major because he was commander of the Fayetteville Independent Light Infantry at the time. He was also one of the higher ups in the echelon of the Masonic Lodge. That evening, March the 4th, they held a ball for Lafayette with over 200 people, and it was well attended by the populace. The ladies outnumbered the men, and Lafayette remarked how their appearance was quite pleasing. This hotel was completed 1 month before Lafayette's arrival. So just like nowadays, things kind of get done at the last minute. This is Major Bruce Dawes, who's the current commander of the Fayetteville Independent Light Infantry, which, by the way, was founded in 1793. President Washington encouraged states and towns to supplement their militia, to start militia if they didn't already have one, because of the concern about European aggression at that time. He's positioned next to the Lafayette Hotel. It too burned in the Great Fire of 1831. But when you walk along that sidewalk, you can see the sandstone foundation of the original Lafayette Hotel. Lafayette did not stay in the Lafayette Hotel. He stayed at the home of Duncan McRae, who is the resident banker in the Fayetteville branch of the State Bank of North Carolina. This is where it stood. Now it's the old county courthouse, which was built in its place in 1924. So our celebration will be on March the 4th and the 5th. And what you see here, the phrase commemorate, educate, celebrate, is the mantra for the American Friends of Lafayette, and it's one that we've adopted. Because while we're commemorating, we certainly want to educate people about Lafayette and his importance to our country and its founding, but we also want to make it fun. So it is indeed a celebration. Like they say, a little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down. This is the logo just for our bicentennial. The image in the center of the Lafayette with the semicircle of 13 stars is the image for the Lafayette Society. We will have a reenactment of Lafayette's arrival. Because of construction at the current townhouse. We are having the reenactment at Lafayette Plaza in Cross Creek Park, right in downtown. And you can see the brick plaza on the left side has a stage for our presenters. And there we will have Judge Toomer welcome Lafayette. There'll be room for seating 125 guests in chairs, and then a sitting wall here. We'll have patients standing. So pretty much this whole area is going to be filled with people, the DAR units, SAR units, Colonial Dames, and we will have Lafayette arrive in a carriage. And we do have a 4-pound cannon that will be located a short distance away to simulate the announcement of his imminent arrival, just as it did 200 years ago. Afterwards, there'll be a reception just up the hill at First Presbyterian Church, which was constructed in 1816, again burned in the Great Fire of 1831, but was reconstructed very quickly within the following year. The eulogy for Lafayette in 1834 was delivered from that church. In the fellowship hall, we'll have donuts and coffee. Those aren't just regular donuts, they're croissants. The bakery that is providing it as part of their sponsorship, Superior Bakery, has been awarded by Yelp as the best bakery in North Carolina. So that's a little modern day pride too. That's an image of the statue. It's the only statue of Lafayette in North Carolina. We think that what's on the base is just as important as the statue, because this expresses in 25 words or less what Lafayette stood for. And early on, the Lafayette Society often talked about Lafayette's role in the Revolution. But lately, we've come to realize the importance of talking about his role as a humanitarian, his role on the world stage, really, as a champion of freedom and equality and justice. So we are much more thoughtful about it, presenting that side of his character. He was true to these values throughout his lifetime. He never wavered. There will be a ball that evening from 6 to 9 p.m. It's going to be in the Botanical Garden. It's a wonderful facility. There's an orangery there, which has 50-foot ceilings and is quite large. This is an image of a ball from Lafayette's birthday celebration in September of 2023. And you can see everyone did put on their period costumes. We told people they could wear a tuxedo or a cocktail dress, but the vast majority wore costumes. And it's a liberating thing to do that. And I've never seen 150 people that social. I might mention that we are expecting 220 people at the Orangery, and we are basically sold out. The next day, we'll have an exploration of local history connected to Lafayette, and of course, some exploration of our history during the Revolutionary War. We were founded as Cross Creek in 1754, incorporated as Campbellton in 1762. So we were a staging area for some of the battles in Eastern North Carolina, although, as you know, most of the battles were in South Carolina and Virginia. We had some pretty significant ones here in North Carolina as well. This is the local history museum, and you might see that image of Hutchins Burton. He is, we actually have an actor to portray him when he comes in with Lafayette, as he did 200 years ago. That gentleman, by the way, looking at the exhibit was Frank. We have probably one of the largest collections of Lafayette souvenirs outside of Lafayette College, which of course tops them all. But these have been donated over a period of years by an alumnus who was dedicated to his alma mater and wanted to leave a lasting gift. These things are quite remarkable, and there will be an open house on Wednesday from 1 to 5 p.m. where anyone can come in and see these. We do also have some documents there, including a letter from Lafayette to President Monroe in February of 1825, apologizing that he could not attend a dinner there because his son's mother-in-law had just passed. We do have the bed from Duncan McRae's home that he slept in. It's been handed down to the eldest in each generation. The current generation, Jim McRae, is a lawyer here in town, and the bed has been handed down in an unbroken chain. That will be on display at the Museum of the Cape Fear. We will have a tour of sites in Fayetteville related to Lafayette and the American Revolution. We don't know that Lafayette visited this site, but it's Cool Spring Tavern, and it's probably one of the most significant structures in North Carolina. This is where delegates from all over North Carolina came, spend the night, and debated over the new U.S. Constitution to replace the Confederation. North Carolina, like Rhode Island, did not pass it in 1788. So the Constitutional Convention for North Carolina in 1789 was held here in Fayetteville. And many of the delegates stayed in this building. Our Masonic Lodge is dates back to about the third oldest lodge, so it's not quite as old as the one in Halifax. Lafayette was, of course, feted here, and this will be where we dedicate the second of the two Lafayette Trail signs for the National Lafayette Trail. And that dedication will be on the 5th, and many of the members of the Masons throughout North Carolina will be here for that. That evening from 6 to 9, there will be a dinner back at the Orangery. Besides being a delicious dinner catered by an outfit out of Camden, South Carolina, which my colonial dames, who are the hosts, tell me that they are one of the best. We will have a dinner theater of sorts. Sweet Tea Shakespeare is a small theater group here in Fayetteville. Very popular. They've been performing for 15 years. They started out doing mainly the more impromptu type of performances, but they're very joyous, very spontaneous, very talented, and they blend in the music. And they're going to do a retelling of the story of Lafayette's visit to Fayetteville in a little bit of a more modern, up-tempo mode with substantial amount of humor, while remaining historically accurate. At least that's what I've asked them to do. We shall see. So if anyone is interested in learning more, our website has information under the Farewell Tour tab on LafayetteSociety.org. The American Friends of Lafayette also have a website dedicated just to the celebration, and that covers events all over the country in all 25 states. It was 24 states when Lafayette visited, but Virginia split into Virginia and West Virginia. And we are offering, ahead of our celebration, a chance to learn how to do English country dancing from one of the best in the business, Jeremy Gershman, whose stage name is Mr. Charles Step Lively. He hails from Central Virginia, north of Charlottesville, and he's been doing this for over 15 years. We had a workshop in November. That's where this picture came from. And I can assure you the guy really knows what he's doing. He also makes learning fun, like any good teacher. while at the same time teaching you the way it should be done. I was there and I was amazed at how easy it is to do, because he teaches you little memory devices so you remember the steps you're supposed to be doing. And everybody was laughing and chatting, and nobody wanted to sit out a single dance. So those are the dates for the workshop: February 20th, 23rd, and March 1st. And if anyone wants to come and learn some English country dancing, even if you can't go to the ball, please, you're invited to come. There's no charge. We ask for a small donation, suggested $10 to help pay for his expenses. We are sold out for the ball, and we are sold out for the dinner. We are asking people to send us an email to Lafayette Anniversary 2025. That's on the website. If they're interested, there may be 1 or 2 cancellations. So we are starting a wait list. So it's a bad problem to have, I guess you'd say. So that's really all I have. And the main thing here, and we want to hear about, is the wonderful archives that you're going to share with us. And at that point, I will stop sharing.
Okay, great. Hank, before I introduce Allison, we did have a question in the chat of a clarification about the artifact exhibit at Methodist University. Would that be available on Tuesday to view, or just Wednesday, 1 to 5?
I'm sorry, it's just Wednesday, 1 to 5.
Okay.
It's in the library, Davis Memorial Library, and the archives librarian told me that they have students that'll be studying for their exams, and that she just simply can't close it off except for that one afternoon.
Okay. And we've also got, if you could type in the chat, Hank, while Allison's talking, there's another question about clarification on the dates for the dance workshops.
I will go to my chat and do that now,
Okay.
hopefully successfully.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Allison Thurman. Allison is a senior reference archivist at the State Archives. She's of Fayetteville ancestry, but grew up in Kinston and came to Raleigh to study history at Meredith College. She later earned a master's degree in public history at NC State University. And she served researchers at the State Archives for over 20 years, meanwhile developing expertise in the regulator movement and the American Revolutionary era. All right, we see it. Allison, your slides look great. And you're muted, Allison.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to get, oh no. Okay, I was trying to, here we are. Okay. Um, well, Adrian, can you still see me? Because I've lost the cameras.
Yes, I can see you, and I can see your slides. They look good.
Okay, great. I somehow have lost the cameras. So, but thank you so much for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so pleased to have the opportunity to showcase records at the State Archives of North Carolina that document Lafayette's 1825 visit to North Carolina. The records originate from various collections, government records, private manuscript collections, and maps. And what I'd like to do in the next few images are take a closer look at some of the documents. Private Collection 676 is named the Lafayette Papers. It's one of our oldest private collections and in our holdings, and I think one of our most precious. It's a collection of private papers that were deposited with the um, Historical Commission in 1921. The Historical Commission was the precursor to the State Archives, so they received that collection very early on in 1921. And the collection includes 3 items, one of which is a contemporary record of a toast offered by General Lafayette at the banquet in his honor in Fayetteville in 1825. And on the screen is the document of Lafayette's toast with a transcription included. The cursive in the handwriting, I'll just point out for these particular documents, is fairly legible, pretty good. But so where possible, the transcriptions include original spelling and punctuation. But so he's a contemporary account. And this is the Lafayette Letter 1825. It's a draft of a letter of appreciation for the reception accorded to him in North Carolina. Transcription is provided on the screen. It's most likely a draft due to changes that were made throughout the document. You can see, for example, at the bottom where the term Commonwealth has been marked out and inserted the word state. There's a couple of other cross outs and things like that that make us think it's a draft, but it's a letter that he was writing. He's very profusive in his appreciation of the affectionate welcome he has received throughout the United States, but especially by the people at Fayetteville. He's also very pleased and proud of the adoption of his name to the town. He speaks of his belief in the generous and enlightened people of North Carolina and the people of Fayetteville to improve Fayetteville and make it even more useful in the future to the state. And on the other side of his letter from 1825, he speaks about the spirit of independence of your fathers, and I join in your wishes for the universal emancipation of mankind. This is an important term. And in this writing, it feels like a subtle reminder to the younger generation of the country's history of the fight for independence and the belief in the right to liberty. And his whole tour, I think, in fact, became a reminder of the and a celebration of the principles of the revolution for the older generation, as been talked about before, the patriotism, reviving that among the older generation. But it also helped instill a new appreciation for the revolution and the ideals of the revolution for the younger generation. The writing in the letter, it fits very well with his lifelong commitment to rights and liberty and to the Declaration of Rights. It's very it's a commitment that he included in a lot of his writings. Um, the idea of a Declaration of Rights, which was actually included in the French Constitution of 1791. Um, the last document in PC 676 is a letter from Lafayette to John McCrae dated 1826, thanking him for the engraving of the town of Fayetteville. This letter includes Lafayette's original signature. Very nice handwriting, by the way. So, um, the letter was written by Lafayette after he returned to France from his tour of North Carolina. And it's very possible that the letter is referring to a map of Fayetteville, which was published by John McCrae in 1825. Um, it's possible he sent a copy of it to Lafayette as a friendly gesture. It wasn't published until late. It was published after Lafayette had left North Carolina, but it was intended to be created to be finished around the time um, that he arrived. And so they obviously had met in Fayetteville, had interactions. As mentioned, Duncan McCrae hosted Lafayette in Fayetteville, and John McCrae was the son of Duncan McCrae. So they prominent family in the area, so they had most definitely met during that visit. John McCrae was the postmaster of Fayetteville for many decades, and he also owned at one point and was publishing the Carolina Observer newspaper that was out of Fayetteville. And this is the plat of the town of Fayetteville, North Carolina, is so called in honor of that distinguished patriot and philanthropist, General Lafayette, is respectively dedicated to him by the publisher. So this is the map that we call usually referred to as sort of the Brazier and John McCrae map of 1825. Robert Brazier is credited as the author, perhaps based on the fact that he had been commissioned earlier by the General Assembly to draw a map of Fayetteville in 1821-22. This particular map was likely completed by early 1825 at the very latest because it includes an image of the Lafayette Hotel, which was not completed until shortly before Lafayette's visit in March. So it is credited as being dated to 1825. And as indicated on the map, it was definitely published by John McCrae, um, who again published it in the Carolina Observer newspaper in Fayetteville. And again, it's possible that this is the document that Lafayette's referring to in his letter to John McCrae, thanking him for the engraving. The title of the map is clearly honoring and is dedicating the map to Lafayette. So it's a very likely that this is the engraving he's talking about. The copy of the map owned by the State Archives was purchased by the Colonial Dames of Fayetteville and donated to the archives in 1939. It was a very generous donation, as you can imagine, because at that time, the number of surviving copies of this particular map was just, it wasn't certain. And we're very lucky to have a copy of this today. And now we'll look at some of the government records that document preparations undertaken by the state in 1825 for Lafayette's visit. In the Treasurer and Comptroller's Office records, on the screen, there's an invoice for costs incurred for preparing Government House in Raleigh for hosting Lafayette. Some of the improvements are on the screen in the invoice. It looks to me like they were doing a lot of painting, a lot of probably furious last minute painting to spruce it up. This building, Government House, it served as the governor's residence by 1816. It was called Government House, Governor's House, Governor's Palace, kind of interchangeably at times. But it did serve as the governor's residence, and it did so until the Civil War, when Raleigh was occupied by Union troops. The troops stayed in the house, and after that, it just wasn't lived in. It fell into disrepair, and the building, the original building, was demolished in 1883. But the house stood at the end of Fayetteville Street in downtown Raleigh, where Raleigh Memorial Auditorium is located today. So that kind of gives you an idea about where the house was. Uh, as many of you may know, Raleigh was a planned city. It was planned out very carefully in a grid. So Fayetteville Street today would have been the same street as it would have been when Lafayette was visiting. And at the very end of Lafayette Street is where the Government House would have been that he would have been hosted at. And this is a government record from the Adjutant General's papers that provides a glimpse into the preparations being made in Raleigh to welcome General Lafayette during his 1825 visit. And on the screen are just some excerpts from one of the pages of instructions from the Adjutant General about the duties of for the militia and the welcome celebrations in North Carolina. You know, the militia had gone up to greet him outside of Raleigh. So you had instructions to Captain Thomas Cobb, who is one of the militia groups that has been instructed to to do that, to escort him while he's in Raleigh. And they talk about the cannon on the Capitol Square, the instructions about how it should be ready by February 28th. That militia is going to take command of salute of 13 guns on the Capitol Square. So just kind of instructions about that. It also talks about the costs of the expense of some of the items um, that they are purchasing for the celebrations. And there are other records in this group that include instructions, and they also talk about escorting Lafayette's party through Raleigh, and they're paying for things such as 12 gray horses, the 2 carriages, number of carriage drivers that they're going to have, There's also records that detail the clothing that the carriage drivers are going to wear. They particularly talk about the livery jackets that they're going to ornament later with decorations, and the black pantaloons or trousers, and also to provide them with a decent hat. So the state was paying for all of that, all of the clothing that they were going to be wearing. And various documents located in that collection indicate that at least over $143 was granted by the state to purchase the horses, the carriages, the drivers, the improvements to Government House, and for many other items that were being purchased for the celebration. And this is the first and last page of the bill for appointing persons to lay out streets in Upper Campbellton and to change the name to Fayetteville, dated May 12th, 1783. So this is the official bill that called for renaming Campbelltown to Fayetteville, which was to honor General Lafayette. And as we know, it's one of the first town or cities named after him. Uh, the document doesn't include all signatures of General Assembly members. It doesn't, the paper doesn't have a formal seal or a pretty ribbon or anything like that, but that's not uncommon for incorporation bills during this time period. This is very typical of what a bill would have looked like during that time. And as time progressed, the metes and bounds would obviously change. But what you see here is the original law naming the town of Fayetteville. And so its history begins right here.
Okay, I'm going to jump in a little bit and remind everyone we will be sending out a list of events, which includes a couple events in Raleigh, not mentioned so far. One here in our building, the headquarters of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. There will be a lecture that Saturday night, March 1st. So stay tuned for those details coming to your inbox. And if you can't make any of the events, you can still commemorate Lafayette at home using a recipe from our collections, Lafayette cake. But it was a common recipe in the period soon around the time of his bicentennial of his tour, and or around the time of his tour, which we're commemorating the bicentennial of, and made popular well into the mid 19th century. And this recipe comes from a legend, possibly true, of a time that Lafayette visited George Washington's mother, Martha Ball Washington, and really enjoyed a ginger cake she made for him. So then the Washington family began calling it Lafayette cake. And we've transcribed the ingredients here. I do want to caution you on only using half the ginger, and that saleratus is baking soda. So those would be the things to keep in mind. Also, this recipe makes a lot. It makes about 2 13 by 9-inch pans. So you might want to half the whole thing and then half the ginger again if you're just having a family amount. So we can send those ingredients out to you with our email later today. Back to Allison.
Okay, so this is the contact information for myself if anyone has any questions about anything that we've talked about today, or if you have questions about services in the search room at the State Archives and our reference services. Also, the correspondence unit is a unit that is prepared to send out copies of records remotely for those who aren't able to visit in person. So our email address is there if anyone has any questions about documents or any of our remote services. We also have our website address on there, which we encourage you to visit for the digital collections that we have. There's a link to the digital collections on there, which is a really great resource for those who aren't able to come in person. But we absolutely encourage you to come in person. I think of the search room as a reality show. You never know what's going to happen when you come to visit. So we would love for you to visit in person. So, but thank you so much. I have really enjoyed being a part of this and this presentation and panel.
All right, thanks to everyone. And I think we have a few minutes left for questions, so please add in some more questions. I have a question for the panel, and that is, as you all have been researching Lafayette to prepare for all of these events, what is the thing that maybe most surprised you or that you most admired about Lafayette in your recent studies? So Frank first, maybe, and then Hank, and then Allison.
The thing that surprised me the most is that a 67-year-old man could travel 6,000 miles over 13 months in all 24 states and apparently experienced no ill effects. One record says that he was not sick a single day. And when you read through the day-by-day record in a book by J. Bennett Nolan, you only occasionally see that Lafayette was resting in his quarters. He was very active, even over the winter stay in Washington City in 1824-25. He made numerous side trips. How did he do it? The banquets, the travel, the questionable accommodations, the alcohol, the receiving lines, the throngs of people who came to meet him. The other thing I would say is when he got back to France, one of his neighbors, the Duc de Broglie, stopped by and he recorded, "I found the Marquis fat, rosy, happy, and suffering no ill effects from a 13-month tour of the United States."
Very impressive. Hank, what's your pick?
That'd be a tough one. You know, reading about Lafayette and studying Lafayette is just a continuous journey. And I don't know if I can really say any one thing, except perhaps some of the quotations from prominent figures of that day, including the abolitionists. I think this may be the one that surprised me the most, is the abolitionist said Lafayette was a true abolitionist because he not only believed that slavery was wrong and that all men should be free, but he also felt that men of color should have equal rights. And while some of the founding fathers espoused their support for emancipation, very few of them would have actually wanted to have a former slave in their cocktail party. Whereas Lafayette was okay with that, and he truly was. He remained absolutely true to his beliefs and his ideals until the very end. And I can't remember the quote right now, but that's one of the things that they honored him for, is he never wavered in that. The political winds did not affect him, and he was buffeted by a lot of political winds in France. So I guess that's my top of the list.
Yeah, sounds good. Allison.
Yes, I'd have to agree with several of those points. The just the arduous journey that he went through, in that stage of his life, and just reading more and more newspaper accounts. I think I really have learned a lot and different perspectives from the newspaper accounts of his travels throughout the country. Those are great primary sources. We don't always think about them when we're as archivists as being the first place to go to, but they are great primary sources, and so one that I've enjoyed. But I also would like, I've also learned more about his ideas of the freedom and liberty beyond just the Revolutionary War. I think we think of him, as being a young, excitable, just ambitious, looking for a fight, when he's 19. But he's also always had that idea for the importance of liberty and equality, and and his efforts with the abolitionist as well. So that stayed with him throughout his whole life. That too is something that that I've enjoyed learning more about.
Okay, so Frank has been putting some great answers in the chat, but one of the little tricks about Zoom is that it's been going to just the hosts and panelists. So I want to read out some of his answers because we had some questions about Halifax events and Jackson as well, and whether we know the names of the people in those towns who met with Lafayette. So let me get to Frank's response. The only person I have named is Major Allen Davey, who gave the welcome address to Lafayette. In Jackson, the official state committee consisted of Adjutant General Beverly Daniel, Major Alfred Stanley, Colonel William Polk, and North Carolina Supreme Court Justice John Taylor. We also know that Dr. Lawrence O'Brien from Murfreesboro was there, as he recorded it in his diary. There were likely other men from both Suffolk and Murfreesboro present. Did I get everything? Nope, there's more. Nope. Okay, that was it for that one. Let's go to the next one. Oh, and then Hank, yeah, same. With the dance workshops. The dance workshops will be in the Family Life Center of the United Methodist Church at 320 Hay Street in downtown Fayetteville. And I'll send out with that list that I promised the email address that Hank has provided to get in touch if you're interested in the dance workshops. Let me see if there's anything else. Did Lafayette have an assistant named Bastien, a man of color who traveled from France to the US? Lafayette and Adrian, not this Adrian, but Lafayette's wife was also named Adrian, purchased land in Africa that she believes the purpose was to educate and liberate formerly enslaved men and women.
Yeah, Bastien was not a black man, but the purchase of the land, it was a plantation in South America, and it was converted by Lafayette when he bought it to a spice plantation, because that was much easier on the workers than cane sugar production. He uses as a demonstration of how someone could operate a plantation successfully with paid labor instead of slave labor. So he banished the whip. He paid a wage to the enslaved. He gave them Sunday off where they could use that for their own time, and they could sell their garden vegetables and things like that. He had a priest come in and educate them. The project never went to full fruition because of the French Revolution, and his properties were seized. So who knows if that would have convinced white slave owners to free their slaves. He did argue forcefully with George Washington to free his slaves. And as a result, he put in his will that upon Martha's passing, the slaves would be freed. And they were provided for. There were some very loyal slaves that were provided for by him because of that. But Lafayette was constantly on him about how wrong it was to fight a war so men could be free when 1 out of 6 Americans were in fact enslaved. So those are one of his values that he remained faithful to throughout his life. Adrian, you're muted.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah,
I've been waiting to do that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're coming up on the end of our hour, but we did have a question about why is the town named Fayetteville instead of Lafayette, as so many other towns in other states are named after Fayetteville, Lafayette.
We don't really know. And, from the record and the North Carolina, their state assembly then, as it was called, they were not into a lot of fancy speech in their record. It was really cut and dried. And they don't say why necessarily. We are hoping that some future historian will, when they're a graduate student, get the collection of letters from some of our representatives that were in the state assembly at the time. Surely they wrote home and said, "Hi, honey, guess what we did today?" and here's why. But the towns that were named after Lafayette could be Lafayette. There are many Fayettevilles, quite a few. So Fayetteville, Georgia, Fayetteville, California, Fayetteville, Arkansas. Fayette is another town. And LaGrange. LaGrange was the name of his chateau, but there are plenty of towns named LaGrange in including one outside Kinston, North Carolina.
Yeah.
I visited there. Sadly, they don't have any museums or any exhibits. It's not a large town.
All right. Well, that's neat that there is another small town named after Lafayette in that
Yeah.
way. Something I learned from you all, and something else I learned was that from Frank's write-up that he did, his article, that Lafayette was buried under American soil because he had dirt from the Bunker Hill shipped to France. So he could be buried in France, but under American soil. So it's amazing that he loved this country so much.
He really did. He was very tempted to move to America. The government granted him land in Louisiana, but he remained loyal to his home country as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine he was really torn. I mean, nobody loved America more than him, but he also loved his home country. So he decided to stay.
All right. Well, I think that's a good note to close out on, but I just want to thank our panelists for sharing these amazing stories about Lafayette and the ways that Americans have commemorated him and the ways that we will be commemorating him here in North Carolina in the next few weeks. So we hope everyone can participate in that in some way. And we will get that list out today to everybody. This has been recorded. So we'll also be sharing the link to the recording as that becomes available, probably in a week or so. And one last comment, I guess, in the chat before we close out about many male babies being named Lafayette. So that's a good point too. Not just towns, but
There
men.
were a lot of people that carry the name Lafayette, either first or second name, because of his visit.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody. And good luck with all these commemorative events. I hope they all generate a lot of enthusiasm for your towns and your history.
Thank you,
Thank
Adrian.
you. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon.
Take care.